Good evening. The job of an elected government is not a complicated one, is it? Keep order on the streets, protect our national boundaries, and preserve our foreign territories. Well, chaos and disorder on our streets and illegal immigration have become the norm. And now this new government, which is proving about as popular as a fart in an elevator, is handing strategically significant UK territory to the allies of our enemy. Ceding sovereignty of the Chagos Islands to Mauritius, which was signed off this week, is an embarrassing capitulation which plays into the hands of China, a despotic and dangerous regime which has close trade ties with Mauritius. The Foreign Secretary David Lammy, who represents Britain overseas, may God help us, said the deal settled the contested sovereignty of the islands. Well, if settled means surrendered, then he's absolutely right. But the truth is that this deal will be very costly in the long term, as we pay through the nose to have a military base there. And here's the kicker. The government won't even reveal the long-term cost of the deal. But it amounts to paying for something that we previously paid nothing for because the territory was ours. Make it make sense. Now, many have dismissed the threat of China in this region, but Beijing have sought to cultivate closer ties with Mauritius in recent years through growing trade and finance initiatives. And there are fears that Mauritius could eventually lease the Chagos Islands to China. Why take the chance? And now, to add insult to injury, the Prime Minister has refused to say whether he would rule out giving up the Falkland Islands and Gibraltar following this sellout deal with Mauritius. When asked to guarantee that no other British overseas territories will be signed away under Labour, the Prime Minister did not comment. Here was his answer.
Look, the single most important thing was ensuring that we had a secure base, the joint US, in particular UK base. Hugely important to the US, hugely important to us. We've now secured that. And that is why you saw such warm words from the US yesterday.
So unusual of the Prime Minister not to answer the question. Now, of course, the Argentinian government are jubilant about the Chagos Islands deal, with their Foreign Minister Diana Mondino celebrating the decision and promising concrete action to ensure that the Falklands are handed back to Buenos Aires. And whilst Keir Starmer insists that the Americans are happy with this deal, the Times newspaper reported on Friday that, in fact, US officials have privately warned against the government doing this deal, saying that it could hand Beijing a strategic spying post. These negotiations look to have been a complete stitch-up, with an important group historically linked to the islands, the Chagosians, having been completely frozen out of the discussions altogether, and with the handing over of British sovereignty happening at a meeting of bureaucratic pen pushers and not debated in or signed off by our own national parliament. So much for democracy. Former Prime Minister Boris Johnson called the Chagos deal crazy, adding, "Why are we doing this? Sheer political correctness, a desire to look like the good guys, as if we're unbundling the last relics of our empire. It's nonsense." Now, the UK Special Envoy Jonathan Powell, who was part of the talks, he defended the deal, and he flippantly said the move was not significant. These are tiny islands where no one goes, he said. We're probably losing more to tidal erosion in the East Coast. Well, let's see about that. And now our own Prime Minister cannot commit to Gibraltar or the Falkland Islands. Back to me if you can, Harry. Spain gave up Gibraltar in 1713, but has repeatedly laid claim to the territory in spite of the islanders voting unanimously to remain British. The Spanish will be emboldened now by the PM's weak words. And Starmer's failure to offer any guarantees to the Falkland Islands is even more egregious, given the bloodshed that we saw in their defence in 1982 under the courageous and moral leadership of Margaret Thatcher. What will the families of the 255 British personnel who died defending the Falklands make of Spineless Starmer's refusal to commit to them now? Did war hero Simon Weston, horrifically burnt while serving in the Falklands, suffer those injuries in vain? Like the famous comedy character Del Boy, the PM is flogging our precious assets at a knockdown price. This deal is far from cushy. Who's running the country now? Only fools. Are you concerned about this deal with the Chagos Islands? And are you concerned that the Prime Minister will not guarantee the long-term future of Gibraltar and the Falklands? gbnews.com/your say. I'll get to your messages shortly. But first, tonight's top pundits. I'm delighted to welcome Dame Andrea Jenkins, Lord Coolvere Ranger, and Dr. Lisa Mackenzie. Great to have all three of you with me, and lots to get through tonight. Lord Coolvere Ranger, let me start with you. Your reaction to what I think is a terrible capitulation regarding the Chagos Islands and deep concerns about the future of the Falklands.
There seems to be unravelling here in terms of what the government's position is on these matters of sovereignty. And I think the Chagos Islands has to come out of nowhere. Let's be honest, for most of us, we didn't know it was on the discussion. There may have been talks being had, and we all know that the Foreign Office has many things bubbling away which they place in front of a new Foreign Secretary and a new Prime Minister every now and again to see if they can get things through. But those politicians have to be very clear where they stand with British sovereignty, because one domino falls and it leads to another conversation and another conversation. And we can't have people being naive about this. If you make a decision that hands over sovereignty of an area of space, what happens to all the other conversations that we have? So you can't disengage one and say, well, no, that's one we're doing in isolation and we're going to do this. And then if you do that, you have to be clear about your position on everything else. And what we're all looking for is leadership and clarity from our Prime Minister on matters of sovereignty. And I think that's what the British public are asking.
But don't you think you won't get leadership from Keir Starmer on sovereignty? I mean, look what we're seeing with the EU. Is renegotiating Brexit, and we're going to see closer alignment. They've already said about students coming over, aren't they, on the student visas again. And so he doesn't care about sovereignty in my books.
I'll be honest. Do you think David Lammy has got any power to do this? Do you think David Lammy himself has decided any of this?
Unilaterally, I doubt it.
Yeah, I doubt. And do you think even Keir Starmer has done this? These are talks that has happened for many, many years. Various politicians will have come in and out of those talks, but we never talk about the state and who actually the state are. Because the state is still there when governments come and go.
Yes, that's right.
And so that...
Some people call it the blob, others call it the deep state. Some would call it the civil service.
Yeah, well, I call it the state because I'm an anarchist and I understand that we don't...
I call it the blob.
Yeah, that we don't just have a government, that we have an actual state.
But Dame Andrea, perhaps the Conservatives have a case to answer here, because it was former Foreign Secretary James Cleverly who opened these talks, which I think cast doubt on his appropriateness for leadership of the party.
Completely, Mark. I mean, when I was an MP at the time, I knew nothing about this. This really went under the radar, which I found quite worrying.
Why did we doing it though?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I think this went under the radar from MPs because I believe in our Great Britain and our overseas territories, and we should protect those. And to give it away like this, and to pay them to give it away as well, when we're hammering our pensioners at the moment.
Well, you could argue that the Prime Minister has inherited an almighty diplomatic mess, and what he's actually doing now is essentially creating closure here, securing access to these islands for another 100 years. So that's an important military opportunity for us. And also, he could argue that he's righting wrongs of the past, because all these islands were taken over by the British. People were deposed. Bad things happened. And he's making good on that.
It feels like if that's the argument, they've drunk the Kool-Aid that's been presented to them. Because what you need from, whether it's the Foreign Secretary, David Lammy, and actually every Foreign Secretary before has not been captured by this agenda. Whether they open discussions, the Foreign Secretary is the arch diplomat working on behalf of the British government, the British state, and making sure our territories are secure and kept secure for Britain. Not handing them over unless there is a really good reason, which we don't seem to have come across so far. Yes, some safety bases and etc. etc. So the art of diplomacy is what needs to be done here. And what we're finding is that the first hurdle, Labour and this government have fallen over and handed something else.
I think what's happened is we've got a government that has inherited lots of different issues.
And problems.
And problems, yeah. And I think they've been a bit overwhelmed. You can see Starmer looks like a rabbit caught in the headlights every day. And every time he makes a new announcement, it's always a bit weird and he's not sure
Correct.
what he's doing.
Correct.
And so what is happening now is people are worried about everything. So he's not putting any confidence in the country. So people are hearing this sort of issue that's probably been happening in the Foreign Office for many years, and they're going, oh, my God, he's given this away.
Well, at 10:30 with the papers, I want to ask all of you whether Keir Starmer is struggling in his new role as Prime Minister. I think that he's under pressure. I think that interview was quite disturbing, actually, all the ums and ers.
Yeah.
I don't think the guy's in control. I think he's having a hard time. Perhaps, not all of it self-inflicted, but we'll discuss that with the papers at 10:30. Couple of seconds, Dame Andrea. A true scandal that this has been debated and ratified by Parliament.
Oh, completely. Absolutely. And I'm shocked, as you said, that we didn't know about it prior to this as well.
Most definitely. OK, folks, lots more to come. Next up, is the assisted dying bill legalise murder? I'll be asking the Hamiltons next.